The air in the library crackled with tension as Betty Jackson, a black librarian, faced a storm of scorn. Mocked by patrons, betrayed by colleagues, she stood firm until a piercing accusation brought police to her side. In that moment, a deaf girl's trembling hand signed a desperate plea, and Betty's courage lit a spark that would unravel a billionaire's darkest secret. What truth could shatter an empire built on lies? And how could one act of kindness rewrite a child's future? Stick with us to uncover a story of heart and defiance. If this grips you, hit that subscribe button to catch our latest videos and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Will Betty's stand change everything? Or will power crush her spirit? Keep watching to find out. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Willow Creek Library, brushing rows of polished oak shelves with gold. The air smelled of old paper and lemon polish, masking the undercurrent of hostility beneath the quiet. Betty Jackson, Dewey, shelved novels with silent grace, her dark curls tucked under a scarf. Her eyes, alert, resilient, betrayed the weight of judgment she'd grown used to. Today, though, it pressed harder. Near the reference desk, a group of well-dressed women loitered like they owned the place. Diane Harper, their sharp-tongued leader, fired a chilling glance. "Is there a real librarian here or just help?" she asked, her voice steeped in venom. Laughter followed. Betty steadied herself. "I'm the librarian, Mrs. Harper. How can I help you?" Diane scoffed, unconvinced. "Someone who knows the rare books section. No offense, but you don't." Look the type. Across the room, Karen Walsh, the head librarian, smirked from behind her desk. "Betty, don't bother Mrs. Harper," she called out sweetly. "Stick to shelving." More laughter. Betty gripped the book in her hands, nails biting into its cover. She said nothing. She couldn't afford to, not here. She turned back to her cart, heart pounding. Sarah's voice echoed in her mind, her deaf sister's final sign. "Don't let them dim your light." Betty drew a deep breath and pushed the cart toward the children's section. That's when she saw the girl, alone, no older than 9. Her blonde braid was neat, her dress expensive, but the fear in her eyes eclipsed it all. Her hands trembled as she flipped through a picture book, head tilted as if straining for sounds. Betty paused. The child was deaf. The clock read 3:09 p.m., no guardian in sight. Betty approached gently and knelt beside her, signing slowly. "Hello, I'm Betty. Are you okay?" The girl froze, then signed back. "I'm Lily. Where's my mom?" Betty signed again. "When did she leave?" Lily hesitated. "When the big clock said 2. Betty's stomach turned. She smiled to keep the girl calm. "Don't worry, I'll stay until she comes back. Want to read together?" A nod. They sat with a book on constellations, Betty signing descriptions. Lily's face lit up, fingers mimicking her. "You sign so well," Lily signed. "No one else here does." Betty smiled, but inside questions stirred. Who leaves a deaf child alone? Was it neglect or something worse? Suddenly, Diane Harper's voice pierced the quiet. "You're supposed to be working, not playing babysitter." Betty stood, calm but firm. "This child was alone. I'm helping her." Diane sneered. "People like you always have excuses." Karen arrived, lips tight. "Betty, focus on your tasks. You're causing a scene." Betty clenched her fists, but Lily clutched her hand, wide-eyed and trembling. That sealed it. "Lily needs someone right now," Betty said, "and I'm here." Diane opened her mouth to strike again, but Betty's stare shut her down. Karen muttered about a write-up. Diane stormed off. Betty turned to Lily, signing, "You're safe with me." But as the child looked up at her with absolute trust, Betty felt it. Something was wrong, and this was only the beginning. The Willow Creek Public Library buzzed with a deceptive calm, its shelves standing like silent sentinels over a brewing storm. Betty Jackson knelt beside Lily, the 9-year-old deaf girl whose mother had vanished an hour ago, leaving her in a sea of strangers. The children's section, with its colorful rugs and star-strewn posters, felt like a fragile sanctuary as Betty's hands moved in graceful arcs, signing stories of constellations to coax a smile from Lily's anxious face. Her dark eyes, warm, Yet weary from the morning's barrage of prejudice held a quiet determination. But the air was thick with judgment, and Betty knew the library's peace was a mirage. Lily's small hands mimicked Betty's signs, her fingers spelling Orion. With a shy grin, Betty's heart lifted. She hadn't seen a child light up like this since her sister Sarah, whose deaf world had been filled with such joy before illness stole her away. "You're a natural," Betty said, her smile genuine. "Want to learn Cassiopeia next?" Lily nodded eagerly, her braid bouncing, but her eyes flicked nervously to the empty library entrance. Betty followed her gaze, her stomach tightening. Where was this girl's mother? Ignoring the sting of Diane Harper's earlier insults and Karen Walsh's smirking betrayal, Betty rose to fetch a water bottle and a pack of cookies from her bag behind the circulation desk. Karen, the head librarian, was there, her fingers tapping furiously on her phone, her blonde ponytail swinging as she muttered something about quotas. Betty avoided her gaze, but Karen's voice sliced through the quiet. "Don't think. You're off the hook, Betty. Mrs. Harper's filing a complaint." Betty's jaw clenched, but she kept moving, her focus on Lily. She wouldn't let their venom poison this moment. Back at the table, Betty placed the cookies in Lily's hands, signing "a little fuel for our star hunt." Lily's face brightened, and she signed back, "Mom never lets me have cookies." Betty's brow furrowed. "Never?" She pushed the thought aside, guiding Lily's fingers to the water bottle, describing its shape in signs. "You're different." Lily signed suddenly, her eyes searching Betty's face. "Others treat me like I'm broken." Betty's throat tightened. She thought of Sarah, of how nurses had spoken over her as if she weren't there. "You're not broken," Betty signed firmly. "You're Lily, and you're perfect." Their moment was shattered, as Lily's elbow caught the edge of a book stack, sending a cascade of hardcovers crashing to the floor. The noise echoed like a gunshot, and heads turned. Patrons in the reading lounge, Diane Harper among them, their eyes narrowing with disdain. "Clumsy child," Diane muttered loudly, her voice carrying. "They shouldn't let her kind in." "Here." Betty's blood boiled, but she knelt to gather the book, signing to Lily. "Accidents happen. We'll fix it." Lily's hands trembled, her signs frantic. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Before Betty could respond, Karen stormed over, her face a mask of false concern. "Betty, this is unacceptable. You're supposed to supervise, not cause chaos." The accusation was absurd, but Betty saw the glint in Karen's eyes. A chance to humiliate her further. "I'm handling it," Betty said, her voice steady despite the fury rising in her chest. She stacked the books, shielding Lily from the staring crowd, but Diane's voice rang out again. "This is what happens when you hire people like her. No discipline." The words were a spark in a powder keg. Betty stood ready to retort when Karen's phone rang. She answered it, then whispered something to a nearby patron, her eyes flicking to Betty with malicious intent. Minutes later, the library doors swung open, and 2 police officers strode in, their boots heavy on the hardwood floor. The taller one, Officer Harris, scanned the room, his hand resting on his belt. "We got a call about a disturbance," he said, his gaze locking onto Betty. "Someone's harassing a child." Betty's heart plummeted. She felt the weight of every eye in the library, Diane's smug satisfaction, Karen's barely concealed triumph, the patrons' whispered judgments. Lily, sensing the shift, gripped Betty's sleeve, her signs rapid. "What's happening? Are you in trouble?" Betty forced a calm smile, signing, "It's okay, just a misunderstanding." But her pulse raced as Harris approached, his partner, trailing behind, their presence amplifying the room's hostility. "Ma'am, step away from the child," Harris ordered, his tone clipped. Betty raised her hands slowly, her voice even. "I'm a librarian. I'm helping this girl. She's deaf and was left alone." Harris's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched into his features. "We'll need your ID. Now." Betty's fingers shook as she reached for her badge, aware of Karen's smirk from the desk. Diane chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "She's been hovering over that poor girl all afternoon. Who knows what she's up to? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Betty's mind flashed to Sarah, to the times she'd been dismissed as less than because of her skin. She handed over her ID, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I'm doing my job. This child needed help. Lily, her face pale, signed frantically. Betty's nice. She's my friend. But the officers couldn't understand, and Karen stepped forward, her voice saccharine. Officers, I called you. Betty's been causing trouble all day. Harris's partner, a younger officer, hesitated, his eyes flicking to Lily's distressed signs. But Harris pressed on, his tone hardening. We don't take kindly to disturbances, especially involving kids. You need to come with us. Betty's breath caught, the threat of arrest looming like a guillotine. She signed to Lily, Stay calm, I'll fix this. But her heart pounded with fear, not for herself, but for the girl who trusted her. The library was a cauldron of whispers now. Patrons craning their necks, Diane's smile widening. Betty felt the weight of centuries in that moment. The same old story, her worth questioned, her humanity erased. But then Lily did something extraordinary. She climbed onto her chair, her small frame trembling, and signed with fierce clarity, Betty good, don't take her. The motion was so bold, so desperate, that even Harris paused, his hand hovering over his radio. Before he could respond, a shadow moved at the library's entrance. A woman in a tailored coat, her auburn hair pulled into a sleek bun, stood, watching, her face unreadable. Eleanor Prescott, CEO of Prescott Couture, had returned for her daughter. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, took in the scene. Betty's defiance, Lily's plea, the officer's looming threat. The library held its breath, unaware that this moment would ignite a chain of revelations that would shatter an empire. But for now, Betty stood tall, her hand still clasped in Lily's, a beacon of kindness in a world determined to break her. The Willow Creek Public Library stood frozen, its air thick with the residue of confrontation. Betty Jackson, her heart, still racing from the police's accusations, knelt beside Lily, the 9-year-old deaf girl whose fierce signs had just silenced a room of scorn. The officers, momentarily thrown by Lily's defense, hovered uncertainly, their authority challenged by a child's clarity. Betty's dark eyes, burning with quiet defiance, met Lily's wide ones, and she signed softly, You're so brave. But the weight of the library's judgment, Diane Harper's smug gaze, Karen Walsh's triumphant smirk, pressed against her like a gathering storm. She didn't see the woman at the entrance, the one whose calculating stare would change everything. Eleanor Prescott, CEO of Prescott Couture, stood framed by the library's glass doors, her auburn hair catching the fading sunlight. Her tailored coat and diamond earrings screamed wealth, but her face was a mask of enigma, her green eyes dissecting the scene with surgical precision. She'd arrived just as Betty faced down the officers. As Lily's small hands signed a desperate plea for her protector, Eleanor's gaze lingered on Betty, on the way she shielded Lily, on the fire in her posture despite the crowd's venom. She noted the police, the whispering patrons, and the head librarian's barely concealed glee. Without a word, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to her assistant. Find everything on Betty Jackson. Now. Inside, Officer Harris cleared his throat, his authority wavering. We'll let this go for now, he said, handing Betty's ID back with a grudging nod. But watch yourself. His partner, younger and less hardened, glanced at Lily's trembling hands, his expression softening. They retreated, their boots echoing like a fading threat. Karen swooped in, her voice dripping with false concern. Betty, you're lucky they didn't arrest you. This is your last warning. Betty didn't respond. Her focus was on Lily, who signed, Are they gone? Betty nodded, signing back, You're safe now. But she wasn't so sure about herself. Diane Harper, sensing her moment, strode forward, her heels clicking ominously. This library's gone downhill, she declared loudly, ensuring every patron heard. Hiring people who cause scenes, I'll be speaking to the board. The words were a knife, each one aimed at Betty's dignity. Karen nodded eagerly, her eyes glinting with opportunity. Betty's hands shook as she stacked the scattered books, her mind racing. She'd endured insults before, but this public humiliation, this threat to her livelihood was a new kind of wound. Lily tugged at Betty's sleeve, her signs hesitant. "Will you get in trouble because of me?" Betty's heart cracked at the girl's guilt. "No way," she signed, forcing a smile. "You're worth it." But as she glanced at Karen, now whispering to another patron, Betty knew the truth. Her job, her fragile foothold in this unforgiving town, was slipping away. The library clock struck 4 p.m., and Eleanor finally stepped inside, her presence commanding silence. Karen rushed forward, all smiles. "Mrs. Prescott, I'm so sorry for the commotion. We're handling it." Eleanor ignored her, walking straight to Lily's table. "Lily, darling," she said, her voice smooth but distant, signing awkwardly as she spoke. "Time to go." Lily's face fell, her hands signing to Betty. "Can you come tomorrow?" Before Betty could answer, Eleanor's gaze pinned her. "Betty Jackson, correct?" Her tone was ice, unreadable. Betty nodded, her pulse spiking. How did this woman know her name? "You took care of my daughter," Eleanor said, her eyes flicking to the cookie crumbs on the table. Unprompted. Betty squared her shoulders. "She was scared. I did what anyone would." Eleanor's lips twitched, almost a smile, but it vanished quickly. "We'll see." She took Lily's hand, leading her out without another word. As they left, Lily turned, signing a quick thank you that pierced Betty's heart. The library emptied, and Betty's shift ended in a blur. Karen cornered her in the staff room, her voice sharp. "You're done, Betty. The board's had enough of your disruptions. Clear your desk." Betty's breath caught, the words a physical blow. "You called the police," she said, her voice low. "You set me up." Karen shrugged, unrepentant. "You don't belong here, never did." Betty gathered her things, a photo of Sarah, a worn notebook, her hands trembling with fury and grief. She walked home through the dusk, the weight of eviction notices and unpaid bills heavy in her bag. In her cramped apartment, Betty sank onto the couch, staring at Sarah's photo. Her sister's signed words echoed, "Don't let them dim your light." But tonight, that light flickered. She'd helped a child, and it had cost her everything. Why did doing right always come with such a price? Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts, an unknown number. "Miss Jackson," a crisp voice said. "This is Margaret Lee, assistant to Eleanor Prescott. Mrs. Prescott requests your presence at Prescott Couture tomorrow, 9:15 a.m. Betty's breath hitched. Eleanor Prescott, the billionaire whose face graced fashion magazines, wanted to see her? Was this a trap, a reward, or something far darker? She clutched Sarah's photo, her resolve hardening. Whatever awaited, she'd face it head on. But as she drifted to sleep, a single question haunted her. Why had Eleanor left Lily alone for so long? The answer, she sensed, would unravel a truth more dangerous than she could imagine. The morning sun pierced the towering glass facade of Prescott Couture's headquarters, a monument of steel and ambition in the heart of Willow Creek. Betty Jackson stepped into the lobby, her thrift store blazer a stark contrast to the sleek executives brushing past her. At 27, her dark eyes carried the weight of yesterday's wounds, Diane's venom, Karen's betrayal, the police's suspicion, and the loss of her job at the library. Yet beneath her coiled curls, a fire burned, fueled by the memory of Lily's trusting signs and her late sister Sarah's unyielding courage. Eleanor Prescott's summons was a mystery, and Betty was determined to face it, even if it felt like walking into a lion's den. The elevator hummed to the 40th floor, where Margaret Lee, Eleanor's assistant, greeted her with a clipped nod. "Mrs. Prescott is waiting," she said, leading Betty through a corridor lined with fashion sketches and awards. The conference room was a cathedral of glass, overlooking the town like a queen's throne. Eleanor stood at the window, her auburn hair gleaming, her tailored suit a silent declaration of power. She turned, her green eyes sharp as cut emeralds. "Miss Jackson," she said, her voice smooth but laced with steel. "Sit." Betty took a chair, her pulse quickening. The memory of Lily, the deaf 9-year-old she'd comforted in the library, anchored her. "Why am I here?" she asked, her tone steady despite the room's oppressive grandeur. Eleanor's lips curved, not quite a smile. "You helped my daughter yesterday, unprompted. Why?" Betty's brow furrowed. She was alone, scared. Anyone would have done the same. Eleanor's gaze hardened. No one else did. Not the staff, not the patrons. Only you. Betty shifted, sensing a trap. "If you're thanking me, I don't need it. Lily deserved better than being left like that." The air thickened, Eleanor's expression unreadable. She leaned forward, her hands clasped. "I left Lily there. Deliberately. A test, if you will. I wanted to see who'd notice her, who'd care. In a town full of opportunists, you were the only one who passed." The words hit Betty like a slap. Her fists clenched, her voice rising. "A test? You used your daughter, deaf, vulnerable, as bait? That's sick." Eleanor didn't flinch, her composure infuriating. "It's pragmatic. I'm surrounded by people who want my money, my influence. I needed to know who's real." Betty's anger boiled over. "Lily's not a pawn in your games. She's a child." And she was terrified. Eleanor's eyes flickered, a crack in her armor. But she pressed on. "You're bold, Miss Jackson. Bold enough to defy police, to ignore your manager's orders. I admire that." She slid a folder across the table, a check peeking out, more zeros than Betty had ever seen. "Compensation for your wrongful termination. Take it." Betty's stomach churned. She pushed the folder back, her voice low but fierce. "I'm not for sale, and I'm not here to stroke your ego. Lily deserves better than this." The room fell silent, the city's hum faint beyond the glass. Eleanor's face betrayed nothing, but her fingers tightened around her pen. "Everyone has a price," she said, almost to herself. Betty stood, her shadow falling across the table. "Not me. And if you think money can erase what you did to Lily, you're wrong." She turned to leave, her heart pounding, when Eleanor's voice stopped her. "You're more than you seem, Betty. I'll be in touch." Back at her apartment, Betty's mind reeled. Eleanor's test was monstrous, but something deeper gnawed at her. Why was Lily's mother so guarded, so controlling? She sank onto her couch, Sarah's photo staring back from the coffee table. "Don't let them dim your light," Sarah had signed. Betty's resolve hardened. She wouldn't let Eleanor's world swallow her. That evening, a knock at her door startled her. Malik Thompson, a fellow library worker, stood there, his dark eyes urgent. At 30, Malik was a quiet ally, his battles with prejudice making him a kindred spirit. "Betty, you need to see this," he said, handing her a tattered envelope from the library's archives. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping dated 5 years ago. Prescott Couture CEO questioned in Hit and Run. The article detailed a car accident involving Eleanor, who'd allegedly been distracted, causing a crash that left a child, unnamed, permanently deaf. The story was buried, the case sealed with a settlement. Betty's breath caught. "Lily," she whispered. Malik nodded grimly. "There's more. I found emails in the old system. Eleanor funded a hearing restoration project, then shut it down when it got close to a breakthrough. She didn't want Lily to hear again." Betty's hands shook, the clipping crumpling in her grip. "Why?" Malik's voice was low. "Control. Guilt. If Lily hears, she might learn the truth about that crash." The revelation was a thunderbolt. Betty paced, her mind racing. Eleanor hadn't just neglected Lily. She'd orchestrated her isolation, her dependence. The test at the library wasn't about trust. It was about ensuring no one got too close. Betty thought of Lily's bright signs, her quiet strength. That girl deserved the truth, not a mother who used her as a shield for her shame. Malik leaned forward, his voice urgent. "I've got a lead. Eleanor takes Lily to a clinic outside town, supposedly for checkups, but it's off the books. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Betty's eyes narrowed. You're sure? Malik nodded. I've seen the bookings. Something's not right. Betty clutched the clipping, her resolve crystallizing. Then we're going. Lily needs someone in her corner. As Malik left, Betty stood at her window, the town's lights blurring. Below, the clipping lay on her table, a ticking bomb. Eleanor Prescott, the untouchable billionaire, had built her empire on secrets. But Betty was no longer just a librarian. She was a woman who'd seen through the cracks in that empire. Tomorrow, she'd step into Eleanor's world, not as a pawn, but as a reckoning. The truth about Lily's deafness, about Eleanor's guilt, was within reach, and Betty would not rest until it was hers to wield. The sky over Willow Creek was a bruised gray, heavy with the promise of rain, as Betty Jackson sped toward a remote clinic 50 miles out of town. Her hands gripped the wheel of Malik's borrowed sedan, the crumpled newspaper clipping about Eleanor Prescott's hit and run tucked in her pocket like a talisman. At 27, Betty's dark eyes burned with purpose, her heart pounding with the weight of what she was about to do. Malik, her ally and fellow library worker, sat beside her, his jaw tight as he checked the GPS. They were chasing a truth that could shatter an empire. The truth about Lily, the 9-year-old deaf girl whose mother, Eleanor, had buried a devastating secret. The clinic, hidden behind a curtain of pines, was where it would all unravel. Betty's mind flashed to yesterday's confrontation at Prescott Couture, where Eleanor had offered her a check to buy her silence, revealing her chilling test of leaving Lily alone. The clipping Malik found had confirmed Betty's suspicions. Eleanor's car crash 5 years ago had caused Lily's deafness, and she'd silenced the story with money. Worse, she'd sabotaged treatments that could restore Lily's hearing, fearing her daughter's judgment. Betty's resolve hardened. Lily deserved the truth, and Betty would be her voice. The clinic loomed ahead, a squat modern building with tinted windows that gleamed like unblinking eyes. Betty parked behind a row of trees, her breath shallow. You sure about this? Malik asked, his voice low. Betty nodded, clutching the clipping. Lily's trapped in Eleanor's lies. We end this today. They slipped out, moving silently. Toward the building, the air thick with pine and tension. Inside, the clinic was sterile, its white walls and humming fluorescence a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. Betty and Malik crept past an empty reception desk, following muffled voices down a corridor. Through a glass door, Betty saw her, Lily, sitting on an exam table, her blonde braids swinging as she signed nervously to herself. Eleanor stood nearby, arguing with a doctor in a low, urgent tone. No changes, Eleanor snapped, her voice sharp. I need confirmation that her condition is permanent. Betty's blood ran cold. She signed to Malik. She's making sure Lily stays deaf. Malik's eyes widened, but before they could move, Lily's head turned, her gaze locking onto Betty through the glass. The girl's hands flew up, signing with desperate clarity. Betty, help! Eleanor spun around, her face paling as she saw Betty. The doctor froze, his clipboard clattering to the floor. Betty burst through the door, Malik behind her, the clipping clutched like a weapon. It's over, Eleanor, she said, her voice steady despite the fury in her chest. I know what you did. The crash, the cover-up, the treatments you blocked. Eleanor's composure cracked, her green eyes darting to Lily, who watched with wide, uncomprehending eyes. You don't understand, Eleanor hissed, stepping forward. This is none of your business. It's Lily's business, Betty shot back, holding up the clipping. You caused her deafness, then lied to keep her in the dark. You're not protecting her. You're controlling her. The doctor, a middle-aged man with a nervous tic, stammered, Mrs. Prescott, Eleanor silenced him with a glare, but Betty pressed on. Tell her, Eleanor. Tell Lily why she can't hear. Lily's hands moved, her signs frantic. What's happening? Why are you fighting? Betty knelt beside her, signing gently. Your mom has something to tell you. Something important. Eleanor's face contorted, a mix of rage and fear. You're nobody, she spat at Betty. A fired librarian with no power. You think you can judge me? But her voice wavered, and Betty saw it, the guilt eating her alive. Malik stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. We have proof, Mrs. Prescott. The emails, the project you buried, it's done. Eleanor's gaze flicked to him, then back to Betty, her empire crumbling in the silence. Lily, sensing the weight of the moment, climbed off the table and signed to her mother, her hands steady despite her trembling lips. Mom, I know you're hiding something. I've known for a long time. I heard the whispers. The words, signed with a child's unflinching clarity, broke Eleanor. She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Lily, she whispered, her voice raw. I was scared. If you heard again, you'd hate me. I couldn't lose you. Betty's heart twisted, but she stayed focused, signing to Lily. Your mom made a mistake. A big one. But there's a treatment that could help you here, even a little. She didn't want you to try. Lily's eyes widened, her signs slow, deliberate. I want to try. I don't hate you, Mom, but I hate the lies. The room stilled. The truth, a thunderclap. Eleanor's shoulders shook, tears spilling as she looked at her daughter, the child she'd tried to cage in silence. I'm sorry, she choked, signing clumsily. I thought I was protecting you. The doctor, regaining his composure, stepped forward. Miss Lily, the new treatment has a 60% chance of partial hearing recovery. Your mother has refused it for years. Lily turned to Betty, her hand seeking hers. What should I do? Betty squeezed her fingers, signing, It's your choice, Lily. Not mine, not hers. What do you want? Lily's face was set with a strength that belied her age. I want to hear, and I want you with me. Eleanor nodded, her voice barely audible. Whatever you want, Lily. The admission was a surrender, the billionaire stripped bare by her daughter's courage and Betty's relentless truth. Malik slipped the clipping back into his pocket, his eyes meeting Betty's, a silent vow to see this through. The doctor began preparing paperwork, his hands shaking as he realized the gravity of the moment. Betty stood beside Lily, her heart pounding with a mix of triumph and sorrow. She'd torn down Eleanor's walls, but the cost was etched in Lily's confused eyes, in Eleanor's broken posture. The clinic's sterile walls seemed to close in, the weight of what came next pressing down. Betty knew this was only the beginning. Lily's journey, Eleanor's redemption, and her place in their world were far from settled. But for now, the truth had won, and that was enough. 6 months had passed since the sterile walls of the clinic bore witness to a reckoning, and the Willow Creek Public Library stood transformed under an autumn sky. Golden leaves swirled outside, mirroring the quiet revolution within. Betty Jackson, once a scorned librarian, now stood at the heart of a bustling community event, her dark curls framing a face alight with purpose. At 27, her brown eyes held a new strength, forged in the fire of defiance and compassion. The library, once a battlefield of prejudice, was now a beacon of change, its shelves lined with books on inclusivity, its walls adorned with children's artwork. But it was the girl beside her, Lily, the 9-year-old whose deafness had been a billionaire's secret, who truly anchored this moment. Lily, her blonde braid catching the sunlight, wore a hearing aid that hummed softly, a testament to the treatment she'd fought for. The experimental therapy hadn't restored her hearing fully, but she could now catch the faint notes of a piano, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of voices. Her hands still danced in signs, but her smile was brighter, her eyes alive with discovery. She tugged Betty's sleeve, signing, Listen, the piano sounds like stars falling. Betty laughed, signing back, You're a poet, Lily. Together they stood at a table displaying tactile art, sculptures Lily had crafted, each one a story told through touch for those who couldn't hear or see. The library buzzed with families, many from the Prescott Foundation for Children with Disabilities, now a thriving force thanks to Betty's leadership. Eleanor Prescott, once the untouchable CEO of Prescott Couture, moved among them, her auburn hair loose, her tailored suits traded for a simple sweater. The woman who'd buried a hit and run that deafened her daughter who'd blocked Lily's treatments to shield her guilt, was no longer a fortress of control. Her green eyes, once cold, now softened as she watched Lily show a sculpture to a younger child. Eleanor's transformation wasn't loud. It was in the way she knelt to listen, the way she signed haltingly but earnestly, the way she let Lily. Betty caught Eleanor's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. 6 months ago, in that clinic, Lily's demand for truth had shattered Eleanor's empire of lies. The aftermath had been seismic. Eleanor had confessed publicly, her voice breaking on national news as she admitted the crash, the cover-up, the fear that had driven her to cage her daughter in silence. The scandal could have ruined her, but Betty had urged her to face it, to rebuild not with money but with honesty, and she had. The library event was proof. Karen Walsh, the head librarian who'd orchestrated Betty's firing, was gone, dismissed, after the board reviewed her role in the police incident. Diane Harper, the patron who'd spewed venom, had sent a quiet apology, her donation to the foundation, a grudging nod to change. Even Officer Harris, the cop who'd nearly arrested Betty, had attended a sensitivity training Betty helped design. His gruff handshake a small victory. The town was shifting, not because of Eleanor's wealth, but because of Betty's courage and Lily's heart. Malik Thompson, Betty's ally, leaned against a shelf, his dark eyes gleaming with pride. "You did this, Betty," he said, nodding at the crowd. "Turned their world upside down." Betty shook her head, signing to Lily nearby. "She did. I just held her hand." Malik chuckled, but his gaze softened. He'd been promoted to head librarian, his battles with prejudice now fought with policy changes and outreach programs. Together, he and Betty had made the library a haven, not a hierarchy. Eleanor approached, her steps tentative. "Betty," she said, her voice. "Lou, I need to say something." The crowd faded into the background as Betty faced her, the weight of their journey heavy between them. "I saw Lily's disability, not her strength," Eleanor admitted, her eyes glistening. "You saw her and you saw me, even when I didn't want to be seen." She handed Betty a folder, legal papers naming her co-director of the Prescott Foundation, with a budget to help thousands. "This isn't payment," Eleanor said, "it's trust." Betty took the folder, her throat tight. She thought of Sarah, her deaf sister, whose memory had guided her through every insult, every fight. "I'll do it for kids like Lily," she said, her voice firm. "And for the ones no one sees." Eleanor nodded, a tear escaping, and for the first time, Betty saw not a billionaire, but a mother learning to let go. As the event wound down, Lily ran to Betty holding a small sculpture, a star, its edges rough but radiant. "For you," she signed, her hearing aid glinting. "Because you're my light." Betty knelt, hugging her, her eyes stinging. The library, once a place of scorn, now echoed with laughter, with possibility. Eleanor watched, her hands signing. "Thank you to Betty," a gesture small but seismic. Outside, the autumn leaves fell, a golden cascade of change. Betty stood with Lily, signing stories of stars, her heart full. She'd faced a town's prejudice, a billionaire's secrets, and emerged not just whole, but triumphant. The Prescott Foundation would grow, Lily would hear more each day, and Eleanor would rebuild her bond with her daughter. But Betty's victory was simpler, deeper. She'd stayed true to herself, to Sarah's light, to the belief that one act of kindness could topple empires of lies. The library's doors stayed, open late that night, welcoming all, and as Betty signed good night to Lily, she knew this was only the beginning. A new chapter, written not in ink but in courage, was just unfolding. What an incredible journey we've shared with Betty, Lily, and Eleanor, a story of courage, truth, and the power of kindness to reshape lives. We hope it touched your heart as much as it did ours. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What moved you most? Have you ever seen a single act of compassion change everything? Drop a note about where you're watching from, and let's keep this conversation alive. Thank you for joining us, for feeling this story with us, If you loved it, hit subscribe to catch our next tale of hope and defiance. Until then, keep shining your light, and we'll see you soon.